There have been so many upheavals for buyers, sellers, and real estate agents over the past few years, with decreased inventory, increased home prices, and of course, big cases like Sitzer versus NAR coming to a conclusion, hopefully. The landscape has changed for homebuyers and real estate agents. In today's episode, we're going to break down realtor confidence, homebuyer and seller trends, and how both agents, homebuyers, sellers, and investors are interacting with the housing market. I'm Kathy Fettke, and welcome to The Real Wealth Show.
You're listening to The Real Wealth Show with Kathy Fettke, the real estate investor's resource.
I am joined today by Jessica Lautz, Deputy Chief Economist and Vice President of Research at the National Association of Realtors. With her experience in housing data and market insights, Jessica will walk us through the latest trends from realtor confidence and homebuyer demographics to the impact of recent industry changes. We got a lot to talk about. So, Jessica, welcome to The Real Wealth Show.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here.
Let's start with just what you do at NAR, National Association of Realtors, for those who don't know what NAR is.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a trade organization of realtors, and I am the Deputy Chief Economist here. I oversee a lot of our research, work with the team, making sure that we get out really current information for realtors so that they can be the best in the business.
And that is why we have you here. We have so many real estate investors listening, but also a lot of those investors are real estate agents. And you know, it's been tough, right? Sales have been so low and inventory low, and buyers, the buyer pool low and diminishing because of these high interest rates and high prices. So you do surveys, you're in touch with your realtors. Recently, you did basically a realtor confidence survey, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that. How are realtors feeling today?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we look at home sales activity, we do see that 2024 ended at the lowest level that we've seen since 1995. So at a time period where over that last 30 years, we have 75 million more people in this country. So it really just doesn't make sense that we would have the same home sales volume. On a monthly basis, we do our Realtors Confidence Index, and we've been doing that since 2008. Obviously, a very critical time to establish a survey where we can really look at what member sentiment is and who their clients are on a monthly basis and how that's changing and evolving. And we have seen a lot of changes, actually.
I'm so glad you said that. It's so funny because people love to compare today to the past. It's like, you can't. There's more people. I mean, even since 2008, people like to compare. It's like, I don't know, what is it, 20 million more people or so? I could be totally wrong on that since 2008, but totally different scenario today. We have the internet. We didn't have it then. Realtors were working out of books back then. I mean, everything is different. So what are realtors anticipating moving forward this spring buying season? Normally that's a hot time to be a realtor. What are people expecting this time?
Yeah. So I will say that our Realtors Confidence Index in the last few months has been lagging, but actually in the last month, we've actually seen that tick up, and it is stronger than a year ago. And I think that's the important fact too, is that when we look a year ago, there was a lot of anticipation in the market, but there was a lot of uncertainty, I will say too. The discussions were pretty broad about uncertainty of mortgage rates, uncertainty of inventory. We were seeing all-time lows. But as we ended 2024, we started to see more inventory come into the market. And I think the expectation moving into 2025 is really encouraging from realtors. We're also seeing that mortgage rates are pretty stable. They're in the mid sixes. It's not very exciting when we look at mortgage interest rates right now over the last few months. And I think that's giving a lot of encouragement for the profession moving forward.
Oh, yeah. It's so hard to make a decision where you just don't know where things are going to be in a month or, 6 months. Well, we still don't know. But what about days on market? Are we seeing any changes there? And I know that's such a general question because it's different in every little corner of the world. But, are we seeing nationally any difference?
Yeah, so days on market is actually closer to 30 days than it has been in recent years, I would even say. So we are seeing days on market is a little longer. That being said, we are seeing that the typical sale that's listed out there has more than two offers. So we are seeing multiple offers still happen. About 15% of listings are moving more than the asking price, indicating there's some bidding wars. And I think it's really individual. So we know that at some price points, there's a lot more buyers who are interested in some homes that are really marketed and really shown in the best light. There's going to be more interested parties, of course. So that's all in particular to the local market, where in some areas of the country, that home could sit for a while at a certain price point. In another area, that might be snatched up pretty quickly.
Yeah, and again, for any of our new to real estate listeners, days on market means how long the property's been on the market. And of course, the longer it's on the market, the worse it is for the seller because they probably have to make concessions, discounts. But you know what? It's good for a buyer, right? That's when buyers and especially real estate investors want to dive into properties that have been sitting on the market for a while because they can negotiate usually on those. Can't do it when you're in a day on market like we had for a little while.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, in some areas, if we remember, there were lines out the door for 15-minute showings. Like that's not a healthy market for home buyers to even consider what they're actually making that purchase on. And then the bidding wars were so extreme when we think about 2020, really through almost 2022. So the market really extremes. But now I would say it's not necessarily a balanced market, but in some areas, a more balanced market, certainly than what we saw then.
Do you know if there's certain parts of the country where days on market have increased a lot more than 30 days and other areas where it's maybe less than that?
So what I would say is we don't have local data on days on market, but I would say that it's actually more price point and demand driven. So when we know that there are a lot of buyers, for instance, and I think this is really unique to this particular market, is that at almost the luxury price point, at more expensive price points, there's a lot of buyers who are still very active in the real estate market right now. If we look at really affordable price points, we know that there's a lot of activity there too, but there's fewer homes that are out there. So that's where you're going to see people who perhaps are an investor or perhaps a first-time home buyer or someone who's downsizing. There's a lot of interest there, but there's not a lot of inventory. So we see more movement at that higher end of the spectrum. But I think every local market is going to be completely different. If you're in Omaha, Nebraska, where I was yesterday, that's going to be a very different market than, say, Miami. So I think we have to just all keep that in perspective too.
Yeah, and speak with your local realtor in the market to find out. They should have that data of days on market, and that really is an opportunity for buyers. If we're seeing an increase. I know back in the wild and crazy days of 2020 to 2022, when there were lines out the door, buyers were waiving the most important thing, like inspections and appraisals, and not knowing really what they were putting a lot of money into and potentially buying. Is that still the case in some markets?
So we are still seeing that. And I think it is striking. Yeah, no, it is striking. Well, I think some of this is you don't necessarily need an appraisal if you're paying all cash, right? So we're still seeing a pretty solid share, about 20% on a monthly basis, who are waiving the appraisal. And we know right now about a third of buyers are paying all cash. So when we know that it's that strong of a market, they don't necessarily need that for their loan terms because they don't have a loan. And that's certainly what could be going into that factor as well.
Well, for anyone listening, I don't recommend that. I really, really recommend getting an appraisal. It is a $400 thing. And just a story. We have a lot of cash buyers at Real Wealth because the investment properties are, more affordable. And at least at the time, they were in the under $100,000, when people were buying and all cash and not getting appraisals because the bank didn't require it, right? But this one lady ended up having issues with her foundation, and it was in Texas where there's foundation issues all the time. But what wasn't known was if those issues had been in place before purchase or if it happened after So like, how do you know if you didn't get the
Right.
appraisal? Oh my gosh, just get one. Just
Yeah.
please.
And I would say too on the inspection contingency. So it may be that people are waiving the contingency, but they're still getting the inspection. So they're still, especially if it is one of those homes that you know is going to have multiple offers on it, perhaps bringing that inspector through before you even put that contract down. So you know what you're looking at. And certainly that's one strategy that those experts, those realtors out there, they're creative. So making sure that you can get that home, but you're not wedded to the contingency. They're really thinking through that as well.
Yeah, if you're a contractor and you know how to build houses, fine. Don't get an inspection, don't get an appraisal, but otherwise, no. We need that third party, and always make sure it's a third party unrelated to the realtor or the seller. It looks like from your recent report that December we saw sales pick up a little bit. Is that right?
We did. Yeah. And it honestly had been throughout the end of the year. So if we think about the fall months, we actually were seeing more sales activity really jumping. And I think some of that has to do with mortgage interest rates coming down, but a lot of it has to do with more inventory in the market. If there's actually a product to buy, there's plenty of buyers who are out there right now. We have a lot of young adults in this country really trying to find their first homes. So we know the demand is there.
Interesting. So you are of the belief that because there wasn't enough inventory, that's why sales were low versus what a lot of people are saying is that it's high home prices and high mortgage rates.
It's certainly both of those factors, and they're both very tied together too. So knowing the lack of inventory is really continuing to push up home prices, even as we look at the dead of winter. So usually a much slower time in the real estate market, we're still seeing bidding wars happening. So as we look at that, it is impacting affordability as a direct result too. Something that I think is really interesting is that we're watching new home prices and existing home prices really very close together. And one of the reasons why is because of the bidding wars that are still continuing for homes, for existing properties. The lack of building for new homes, but building smaller properties too means a slightly lower price for new home builders as well.
And didn't prices go up also in December and towards the end of the year in spite of everything?
Yeah. Seeing all-time highs as we end the year of 2024. So looking at the same sales volume as 1995, but all-time high when we look at home prices. So really making it quite out of reach for the typical consumer right now, knowing that to qualify for a mortgage out there for the typical home price, you have to have a household income of more than $100,000. That's out of reach if we think about many school teachers or first responders being able to afford their typical home.
Unless they're married. If you're single, wow, it's going to be really tough.
Totally.
If you're married, a little more doable, and then just put your kids to work. And
everyone just an income earner in this household.
Yeah, that's
do what
right.
you can.
Everyone's
That lemonade stand. Yeah, you bring those pennies in.
All right. So who are these people that are able to buy? Do you have data on like the average home buyer and who they are?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up marriage, actually, because I think that that's an interesting component. So right now, we actually know about a third of recent homebuyers are single. So they are out there competing on a single household income. We know that as we look at first-time homebuyers versus repeat buyers, first-time homebuyers are at an all-time low. So just about a quarter of the market overall. Historically, they've been 40%. So we're very far off from that. If we look at the typical repeat buyer, who's the vast majority of home buyers today, median age of 61. So that's the highest we've ever recorded that. So a lot of baby boomers active in today's real estate market.
Are you serious?
Yes.
That's the median age is 60.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the majority of buyers. So if we're seeing a lot of empty nesters, a lot of people who can pay all cash because they've been in their last home for a long period of time. Yeah, that's the typical buyer out there, it's a fascinating trend that we are seeing. It's a big shift. And that's a home buyer who's not moving for a job necessarily because they may be approaching retirement. They would be moving to be close to the grandbabies or because they're in retirement as an empty nester. Yeah.
But then they would be selling their house, right? So
presumably, possibly, or holding on to that
not.
Property too. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Amazing. And then how about our first-time home buyers? My heart goes out to them.
Yeah.
How are they doing?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have great information on them, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
Winter is always better for first-time home buyers. Winter months, there's less competition from families out there. But what we know about first-time home buyers right now, median age of 38 years old.
Okay.
Also, the highest we've ever seen it, if we look 40 years ago, they would have been 28. So
Oh, wow.
that's a decade of lost housing wealth that they're really losing out there. Perhaps one less move that they'll have in a lifetime because they're purchasing at a later age. We know that they have a higher household income, of course, to compete in this environment, but they actually are more likely to have financial assets today than they have historically too. So thinking about stocks or 401k, even cryptocurrency that they can put for their down payment.
So I'm going to look at this through a different lens, which is the real estate investor who's listening to this show. That means that you've got people renting longer, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Renting longer and maybe even more likely to be someone who has children too, because we know that childcare costs are one of the inhibitors from really entering into homeownership and saving for a down payment. So thinking perhaps about a couple with children may be more likely to be a renter because they have those costs in tow. The minivan costs money as opposed to perhaps a smaller car.
I'm watching it with my own daughter who, they had their second baby and now it's time to put her in daycare part-time and it is so expensive.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. How do you save for a down payment? Well, fortunately, she bought a house at 22 because I made her do it. But so she's okay. But yeah.
Good mama.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So if the average buyer today is 61, are you seeing an increase in cash buyers or is that the same?
We are, yeah. About a third, nearly a third of repeat buyers are all cash buyers. It's really striking, and it's been very consistent, I would say, for more than 2 years now to see that high share of all cash buyers. Homeowners are really gaining a tremendous amount of housing equity, and they have the freedom to either put a large down payment on that home or to purchase their next home with all cash, which allows them really the lifestyle that they may want. Which is extraordinary, truly, the wealth gains that have been had. It's a very divided housing market between this all-time low of first-time home buyers and this all-time high of all cash buyers.
Yeah. So with that, are you seeing a difference in like what they're buying? Like, are the 61-year-olds buying bigger homes or are they downsizing? Do you have any data on that? Or
Yeah. So
luxury or vacation?
yeah, no, and I think you're spot on in this question because we tend to think that someone who's 61 may want to downsize. They may be an empty nester. They're not. They're purchasing the newest homes. They have the freedom to be able to do this. We often think of city centers as a young adult, a haven, but today we're seeing that more likely to move into city centers are boomers because they may want the amenities or the new luxury condo. So it is a different type of buyer today. I think baby boomers really invented everything around them.
Interesting. All right. Don't be hating on the boomers. They're
No,
right.
they're a creative generation. They've reinvented everything, right? So why not would it be home ownership and what they want later in life? I think it's great. They're thriving. And I think that a lot of generations are envious of that. We can see that through every social media meme, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm guilty. Rich and I bought a small house and thought, this is it. We're going to retire in this little tiny house. It's going to be so great. And then I remembered we're going to have grandkids. And I was like, where are we going to put them? I got to have my grandkids here for Thanksgiving and Christmas and all the time in between. So we did that. We went a little bigger for room for them. And I've heard that boomers really like their kids and their grandkids. So maybe past generations didn't.
Yeah, no, and I think that feeling is mutual when we look at young adults' buying habits. I think it's interesting too. They actually really prioritize for young millennials and Gen Z home buyers. Where are my friends and family? If we look at Gen Xers, they certainly did not do that. Older millennials did not do that. Maybe 3,000 miles away is a good distance. So really seeing that young adults are really embracing this family and the connection to family, the proximity to family.
Oh, good. I like hearing that. All right. Let's talk about sellers. There's this whole idea of the lock-in effect that you've got homeowners who have these low rates, are never going to sell. Who is selling today and why?
Well, I think when we look at those repeat buyers, we're really seeing a very similar story. So it's people who have this housing equity, people who are making optional moves. And I think that's an interesting one too. The number one reason to move is to be close to friends and family. So it's not for a job change. It's not because someone has a growing family. And that's someone who has the ability to take all this cash, this housing equity that they're earning and sitting on, and make this move how they want to do so.
All right. So now I'm going to move to a touchy topic subject, which is the lawsuits last year that, we keep hearing. I've been hearing for decades now that, I think it was when Zillow came out. It's like, oh, no one's going to need realtors anymore. And that just didn't turn out to be true. And, people can find their own properties. They don't, technology's here. You don't need an agent. That turned out not to be true. And then with the lawsuits, it's like, oh my gosh, nobody's going to pay those high commissions. Are we seeing any changes after the lawsuits?
Well, we certainly do see that 9 in 10 buyers and sellers are using agents. They want representation in their home buying and selling process. We have to remember that this is the biggest asset that Americans are really holding on to right now, and it's the place that they live. So having that representation is absolutely critical to them. And it's not just for buyers finding that home, it's help with negotiation. If we look at repeat buyers right now in the housing market, they have not done this transaction in 10 years. They're typically living in their home for 10 years before selling again and making their next purchase. And if we think about 10 years ago housing market, we were comparing 2008, 1995, we certainly aren't even 10 years ago housing market. So having that local expertise is really important. I think it's interesting too, when we really dig into the data and look at home buyers, we know that there's a lot of people right now who are moving long distances, especially as we think about the stereotypical boomer, maybe moving to Florida or moving to the Sun Belt for this better weather and affordability conditions. People who are moving long distances are more likely to use agents because they need that representation. They need that local expertise. So really relying on that is incredibly important. Technology is there, but it's not going to answer all your questions.
I mean, honestly, even if I were to buy the house next door, and I am a licensed real estate agent, I would still want representation. That always was funny to me because when I first got licensed, I thought, oh, good, I can do all my own transactions. And then I met, other people were like, oh, I would never do my own. It's really funny. But, especially every area has its unique issues and laws. And like I said, the woman who bought the property out of state in Texas didn't go through us, didn't get an appraisal, didn't get an inspection, and didn't know that, because of that, didn't know that there were foundation issues because of the clay in the earth in that Dallas region. And if you don't maintain your property by watering it, like who waters dirt? Well, Texans, because you got to keep your foundation, wet so that it doesn't shrink and ruin the foundation. So, there's an example of someone who did not get representation and really paid the price for that.
Wow. Yeah, that local expertise completely critical. I would never know any of those things. So I would need a local expert to tell me those things.
Yeah. And, here where I live, it's septic. It's like a local just sort of knows the history of the area. And that's just so important. And like you said, you're not buying a new dress. This is something that could be one of the best things you ever did or one of the worst things you ever did.
Right.
When your home purchase goes well, it is wonderful. And if it doesn't, wow, it can deplete your bank account. So yeah, get that representation, but get someone good. Don't just hire your niece who just got her license. Nothing against your niece, but
you want that expert by your side. And we do see that people are finding that expert through recommendations from friends, family, someone who's used this person before. That's the best recommendation that you can get, is someone who's actually used that person. And that's how we're finding that agents are being found. And they're not necessarily just Googling a name and finding it on the internet and working with John Doe. If John Doe Realtor is out there, I'm sure you're great. But we do know that people want that personal connection.
Okay, well, let's talk about investors now. Investors have, there's been a lot of hate for investors because people think they're taking all the inventory that's just not there. Are we seeing an increase in investor activity or decrease?
Well, it's actually staying about the same. So it really has not changed. Now, we're looking on a monthly basis at mom and pop investors. So someone who's working with a realtor, someone who's working with that local expert. We are not seeing huge changes here in non-primary residence buyers. And I term it like that because I know there's a lot of crossover between vacation buyers and mom and pop investors, but we're not seeing a huge change. It was 16% last month. And we typically see see it in the high teens when we look at that data. We did see an uptick all the way up to 22% a couple of years ago, but it's really come right back down.
I'm with you there. We have a brokerage. We help investors acquire real estate, investment properties nationwide, and we haven't seen a change either. If anything, we've seen an uptick because there is so much rental demand for the reasons we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
People staying put longer, more single households where it's like, how is a single person going to afford today's high home prices, if they don't have someone helping them?
Yeah.
And then what about iBuyers? This is, again, another group that has been hated because they come in with cash and, buy from under, maybe a first-time home buyer. Are we seeing an increase or decrease with iBuyers?
Really no change. It is low single digits. So seeing 1-2% at the most on a monthly basis. So really no change. And we've recorded this data for a number of years now and really just not seeing much change. Talked about a lot, but I think at the end of the day, people want that expert. They want the representation. And if they're even tiptoeing into it, what we know is that potential sellers are realizing, oh, there's a huge cut that's taken here. And I don't necessarily know that I want to leave that money on the table.
And for those who don't maybe know what an iBuyer is, can you explain that?
Yeah, it's someone who you may fill out a form online. Someone has not seen your home. You're filling that out for a company to really place that home on the market. And then the company is saying, sure, I will actually offer you this price for the home and then deal done, as opposed to putting it on the open market, seeing what you can get, having a realtor come in and really price that home competitively with their local expertise. So a very different type of sale. Now, there are some people that might work well for them. Say you inherited this property and it's too emotionally, too damaging for you to work through that, then perhaps this is the best option for you. Certainly there's lots of business models out there, lots of options, but people typically want that local expertise.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And what about vacation homes? Any data on that, if that's increasing or decreasing?
Yeah, so not a ton of change there either. So it's about 5% on a monthly basis. Of course, we always do see some jumps, some coming down. So 6-7%, always quite normal too, but not seeing much change there. It's very consistent on a monthly basis when we look at that. But again, I would say with vacation home buyers, I never really necessarily trust that. Are you a strict vacation home buyer, or are you going to place this home on one of those services like Airbnb or VRBO for a few weeks out of the year too? In which case, I always wonder, are you an investor or are you a vacation home buyer? How much money are you making on this property? So always lots of different transactions out there being had in the real estate market, but it's pretty consistent.
Interesting. All right. Any last comments for our listeners who, again, are mostly investors, but I'm sure we've got first-time home buyers in there and boomers.
Certainly. I mean, I think as we move into 2025, we're in February now. As we move into 2025, I think our expectation is that interest rates are going to stay in the mid sixes, so not huge swings. And so that's certainly encouraging for investors, for home buyers out there, and also for builders to bring more inventory in. With slightly lower interest rates than that 8% that we saw in 2023, we should have more building, more inventory coming into, and more home sales volume. So really expecting a better 2025.
Woohoo! Like it. Wonderful.
We'll take it.
Yes, absolutely. All right, Jessica. Well, thank you so much for being here on The Real Wealth Show. I know our producer, Kaylin, was super stoked to have you here. So,
oh, thank you. No, it was so great joining you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining me here on The Real Wealth Show. If you would like to get more information on real estate trends, where the hottest markets are today, where you could still find cash flow and negotiate interest rates below 6%, like way below, just go to realwealthshow.com. You can speak with one of our investment counselors there for free. You also can join for free and find out where other investors have been able to build their rental portfolio. I'm Kathy Fettke. Thanks again for joining me here on The Real Wealth Show, and we'll see you next time.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and should not be construed as an offer to buy or sell any securities or to make or consider any investment or course of action. For more information, go to realwealthshow.com.